Hi, I'm Mamadou at Timbuktu, and we're here with another edition of Collector's Lens, the program where we understand the story behind the art collection. And I'm here today with,
Adrielle.
Adrielle, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank y'all for coming.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us into your lovely apartment. I'm just like seeing the art all around. Like this is like super inspiring. Had a dope conversation offline, but for the viewers, can you tell us who are you and what do you do?
So my name's Adrielle. I'm an collector, curator, and also a art dealer in New York City. Um, I have like a background in education, but also I kind of funnel that education into analyzing art and amplifying artist stories.
Mm. So, can you take us to the beginning of like how did you fall in love with fine art?
I'm originally from California, and when I graduated with my master's, USC, fight on.
Whoop, whoop.
I was still in LA, and I decided to kind of explore like what the city has to offer me. I was a elementary school teacher, preschool teacher,
Mm.
and you need to do things for free. So I was like, what can I do for free on the weekends? Like, where can I spend my time? And I came across the Museum of Contemporary Arts in downtown LA, and Carrie James Marshall happened to be on view, and I wasn't even expecting to see a black artist. I didn't know what was on view at all, and I hadn't even really gone to museums prior to that, except for like school field trips or whatever. But I walked into that museum, and it was the Mastery Collection, and it was
Mm.
just these huge scaled depictions of black people just vibing, living regular life,
Hmm.
and it was so gorgeous. And like the colors that he used were like I read into like why are the figures so dark,
Yeah.
and it's because he doesn't mix his paint with white when
Mm.
he's like doing his skin tones. And I was like, wow, like that's such a different depiction of blackness that I'm experiencing living in LA, where there's a lot of focus on um, I guess convergence outside of blackness, and like how can you be different than like the status quo of like the black people that you're around. And
Mm.
it just wasn't an area where blackness was really celebrated for me in my experience, especially as
Yeah.
a dark skinned woman. So it was just that residence of being in that place where like I belonged,
Hmm.
and like it was my story that was the most important.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, there's a gallerist walking around, and they passed this barbershop depiction, and she was like, yeah, like this is because like black men really value getting being groomed. And I'm like,
Hmm.
no, they're in therapy. Like they're all
Hmm.
there to talk about their problems and
Hmm.
commune, and like it's a hangout. Like
Yep.
when I used to get my hair done in the salon, like it was like put with a barbershop, and I would get all the tea.
Hmm.
And that is like, as a community, we may not be as akin to like going to therapy, but we definitely have these like third spaces where we talk and we share, experiences. And I was like, that's what he's depicting. And so yeah, basically from there, I knew that I wanted to like I kept chasing that experience
Mm.
of like knowing something about the work and being in a room where I understand something that maybe even the gallerist or like the museum assistants didn't know.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also like after going so often, I got a kick out of like looking at something and being like, that looks like a art. And then looking at it and being like, yes, it is. Like I love that feeling.
Yeah.
And it kind of like got me to like study more and like, learn more work, and um, even like test myself like, okay, I think this is happening here. This is what the piece means. And then read the synopsis and
Yeah.
feel and see like, yeah, I do understand. It's like a high or something.
Yeah.
And so yeah, from that show, I decided to buy a print, which is a
Hmm.
poster from the show, and that was my first collector's piece. It came with a COA and everything,
Yeah.
and it was only $99.
Mm.
And they're like, sure, like we can like see what the bookstore wants to offer you it for. And I took it home, and after that, I just kept that fire of like wanting to like collect,
Yeah.
and definitely along my journey, I feel like when I got advisement on collecting, I got a lot of like feedback, like, well, you need to have this much money. And that's why I'm so passionate about like, no, you do not need to have,
Hmm.
thousands of dollars to collect. Because I was discouraged for like half of my time, you
Mm.
know.
Right.
Even the piece that I have in there that's Kristen Woolery, I have been following her since I was like 22.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to buy a piece from her, but like when I applied to Columbia, I had no money,
Yeah.
and I was like kind of like pulling together whatever I could. And at the
Hmm.
time, her pieces were $600, and I would DM her like, "Oh, like I'm working on it," and then like, "Oh, I got a flat tire, I can't do it this month," like,
Right.
so like obviously it wasn't $600 when I bought it. I wish,
Mm.
but it was like important to me like to close that like circle cycle of like I wanted this
Mm.
piece. I've been talking to her about it for so long, and like finally, like when I finally got it, I was like, yes, like I did that.
Yeah.
Um, and I split it up into payments. I didn't buy it all at once,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
that's fine, you know. So yeah, that was a long story, but that's how I started.
No, that was a great story. Like, there's so much impact from there, right? Like, one, like a couple of themes that I pulled out from that, origin story is like this feeling of fulfillment from one, a representation standpoint,
Yeah.
and even from like an intellectual curiosity standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like going about studying these artists and understanding what's the true meaning behind the works. Because I think that's like one thing that's important to note, right? Especially for those who are not traditionally from the art world or didn't go to art school. Like sometimes you may feel like, oh, there's only one meaning to a piece of work, or like you don't have the correct interpretation. But
Mm-hmm.
to your point, you can have insight that not even the galleries will
Yeah.
have, simply
Yeah.
because of like your own personal experiences and like your cultural and everything else of that nature. So I think that's like a great point. Can you tell us a bit more about like that education process, right? Of like, how did you go about like learning more about these artists, learning more about these works, and even building up the relationship with artists?
Yeah. So I coming from an education background and like
Mm-hmm.
when I started my PhD program, something that I noticed that was different from my master's was that they really encouraged my own thoughts. And for example, like masters, there's a lot of like peer review, and you're
Yep.
gonna read about what somebody else thinks, and like,
Mm-hmm.
do you get it? What they think? And then when you get to a doctoral program, they're like, okay, here's a document from Eric Erickson. Like, what do you think he means by this? And you're like, what I think? And then
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, what do you think? You read it and you say it, and they're like, wow, that's insightful.
Yeah.
We're gonna write this down. And it's like your thoughts are like what's important.
Mm-hmm.
I never had that agency before to like
Mm-hmm.
decide what's important.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me like this confidence to like say like, okay, like, well, what I see is this. And uh from starting from that point and like researching, kind of like DMing artists and kind of wanting to know like, oh, do I get it? Do I have it right? Like, are you alluding to the transatlantic slave trade and this and that? And sometimes they would, say like, well, no, I just like water. But like,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for bringing that up. Actually, that's really insightful.
Yeah.
And what I've realized too, sometimes it is a bit of a soul work for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're kind of guided to create things, and they don't always know necessarily. Sometimes it is intentional, and sometimes it just so happens to touch somebody in a different way.
Yeah.
And every time I ask the artist, like, is this what this work means? No one's like, no, it's this. They're like, I want you to think about what you think.
Yeah.
Every artist has always told me that.
Yeah.
That's their goal, to get you to think. So that's a lot of freedom, and that's a lot of like, duality in an education system where we're always prioritizing, the right answer.
Yeah.
Criticality is about like the duality of things, like how many right answers
Mm-hmm.
can we really draw up? That's the goal. How many can we figure out work?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the beauty of fine art, as you mentioned, is it really gives you this agency to have your own interpretations and
Mm-hmm.
even give you your own voice, right? Like one benefit of just being in these rooms and these spaces is there's very few times in which you as a person, like your opinion really matters, right?
Yeah.
Like oftentimes you're just like subjugating yourself to some kind of authority figure. But to your earlier point, like with like the interpretation of these works, it's a yes and.
Yeah.
It's never a no. That's
No.
not what
Right.
this is. So
Yeah. And then I want to add on to like going to international art conventions. Like
mm-hmm.
the Venice Biennial is a very special um, art experience for me.
Yeah.
Um, because the first year that I went, Simone Leigh was representing the American Pavilion. As you know, the Venice Biennale is like the Olympics for art. And so they would pick one artist to represent each country really as like the primary artist.
Mm-hmm.
And Simone Leigh, sculptress, she was the one that they chose that year that I went, the 59th annual, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, or biennial. And I told everyone she was my cousin because there was no other Black people there. They gave me a water taxi. And a water taxi, like, you know, like in Italy, it's like
Uh-huh.
basically like a limo on the water. It's
Yeah,
fire.
yeah.
You know, water taxi, little champagne. I was in there like,
Okay,
oh, where's Simone
shoot.
at? Let me find Simone.
Where my cousin
Here's
at?
my cousin. They were treating me really nice. And it was just such an experience too to like be in that space and literally like I didn't even know what I was doing at that point. Like I
Mm.
paid my way there and
Yeah,
like I didn't have any like I didn't know any galleries. I didn't this was before I like started this career
yeah.
or had the confidence to like make it my career.
Mm-hmm.
Um and yeah, like those experiences, those pictures that I took, those have opened so many doors for me. Like when I'm talking to people and they're like, "Oh yeah, like you know, like you saw the fall," and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I saw her at the 59th biennial." They're like, "Oh, you were there." Da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
Like even some of the highest acclaim like curators and
Mm-hmm.
people haven't been to that convention, so it
Yeah.
was like so special to me. And then of course last year there was a indigenous person representing the American Pavilion, the first ever, and he's also Choctaw. Like my family's Choctaw, so
Mm.
it was also like another like personal connection. And then of course this year with Koyokua,
Yeah.
you know, that was going to be like another like added experience for me, and I'm sure we'll carry the legacy. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, like kind of putting myself in those spaces and really like holding my weight in those rooms and like
Yeah.
having an opinion and contributing to the space
Yeah.
in a thoughtful way like gave me a lot of like confidence and feeling connected to the art world as well in the fine art space.
Absolutely. So you fell in love with art by going to these museums, collecting your first piece, building these relationships with artists, and more importantly, having the confidence to realize that your interpretations and your opinions do matter to the
Mm-hmm.
overall dialogue and conversations. At what point did you decide, hey, I want to take this as a career, and like what was that process like for you?
Yeah. So one of the things that started it was I founded a nonprofit organization in 2021 named Level Up Literacy Foundation. Um, Multiliteracy is a concept and framework that I learned from my graduate professor, and she passed away during my time at
Mm,
Columbia. And she was really just adamant about the concept of multiple literacies.
yeah.
And one of the books that she wrote here is Literate Thought. And
Mm,
it talks about how like literacy can't just be confined to like words on a page
right.
because like are blind people literate? Are people who, you know, are math wizards literate? Yes, like all these things are literacy. And so I named my organization Level Up Multiliteracy Foundation because I wanted to highlight other ways that we can empower literacies that are akin to like our people, which is
Right.
like oral histories
Right.
and, you know, like visual archival work and things like that. So, yeah, starting that foundation kind of began my like career pivot. And then also it was like the time where I was like trying to get people to involve themselves with the work. So I was working with schools, children, getting artists to interview with, and a lot of those people that I interviewed ended up being in museums a couple years later.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, okay, that also tells me I do have an eye.
Mm-hmm.
So then that's how I started like art dealing. Is like,
Yeah.
okay, I actually kind of can see whose work is really going to make an impact um, on a social level is really what it is.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting, right? So oftentimes, like when you get into the practice of collecting art or being like a true art patron, there's this concept of developing your eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like oftentimes like when you first get into the space, you can be like overwhelmed or overstimulated because there's such a diversity of like styles,
Mm-hmm.
meetings, even origins of works. But then you get to a point in which you start to like analyze and appreciate the work at a different level. Can you talk about like what does it really mean to like develop that eye and like how do you go about doing so?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly feel like it means something different to every person.
Yeah,
I think that like when I say it to other people, I'm talking about um, understanding what has a social political impact at the time and
makes
what
sense.
will age well.
Yeah,
Because you'll notice if you look at the art market and auction houses and things like that, you're going to see that depending on the year that the work is made, the style or the artist is going to be more or less expensive. Like, for example, a
definitely.
huge boom in Black art 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one time where Black Lives mattered.
Yeah,
Um, there was a lot of Black art then, but I see right now people are taking it upon themselves to be a little bit more socially aware.
yeah,
So I think now that the boom in Black art is a little bit more sincere in that it's not like guilty purchasing. It's more just like, hey, these are the population of artists that are talking about what's going on in the world, and this
yeah,
is important. These are important stories, and I want to be a part of this like movement. Um, but yeah, it has to do with like what the art market is what it's doing, and also um, to your point, understanding what you like. I think
yeah.
that's part of the eye as well. Um, Being able to pull together different artists and have a cohesive collection. I don't know
Mm,
how cohesive my collection is. I would say it's pretty cohesive.
yeah.
Just because like my theme is just like me. So whatever in whatever capacity reminds me of myself or some story or some,
Yeah,
you know, feeling that I get from the work is like what my collection's all about. And so yeah, I think anyone can develop an eye
yeah,
as long as you are confident in what you're saying is what you like.
yeah. And that goes back to that concept of having an agency that you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned beforehand and exposure as well.
Yeah.
So I know one thing. So as an art dealer, I know you have a pool of artists that you represent who obviously fit the future mode of like adding to the social political conversation, but you also service a lot of art buyers as well. And I know you do like some education work. We actually met because you was serving on a panel discussion, educating like audience members around patronizing Black art. I'm curious to know, like, as you're working with like collectors, whether they're like newer or been in the game a little bit, like, what does that process look like in terms of like educating them and helping them develop their own artistic eye?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I'll get some collectors who are new that are like super focused on making money,
Okay.
and then also um, very narrow with what they think is like good art.
Okay.
And so those are the hardest clients. And for them, I'm like, all right, go to Pinterest, put together a like folder of art that you think is good,
Yeah.
because it's all subjective. I'm not going to say that's not good art.
Right.
It's just more or less like you don't know what you think is good art because you're switching up. So I'm like, you
Mm,
go to Pinterest,
right.
you put together that portfolio for me to understand your eye. Also, another thing, like when I was first starting, I was really adamant about like, oh no, this is good work. It's gonna appreciate. Like, you need to buy this,
Mm,
and I realized that like because of that same reason, the subjectivity, me telling you is not gonna like you don't we don't really know the future, right? So
yeah.
even though I know I'm right, I can't really like push that onto the buyer. Um, so another tactic that kind of helped me was just like, tell me more about your collection, like understanding what they already
mm,
have,
yeah.
what they already spend, what they already feel comfortable with, is part of the deal as well. Um, and I also just believe in like um, giving the story. That's why I can. That's why I do private art dealing. Is like
Mm-hmm.
I like the conversation with the artist. I want to know why they made their work. I want to be able to sit here and be like, Kiki Elise did this because she's empowering woman, and she likes
Mm-hmm.
divine feminine energy and like
Yeah.
plants and da, da, da. And I'm not really selling you the work. I'm telling you why I like it. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute. Yeah, I like that too. And then you're like, well, how much is it?
Yeah.
You're gonna come to me basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like my style.
That makes sense. So, and I like how it really goes back to your experience when it comes to like art collecting, right? Like placing, you're effectively placing both the artist's story of the piece centerfold along with the collector's interests and
Yeah,
like their thought process, and you're converging the two in order to like hopefully meet this happy medium of them adding it to their collection.
yeah,
So I think that's like really dope right there. And so, okay, so like, so you're going through that process, you're like doing this education and what have you. Like, what do you see really helps like the collector when it comes to like building up their own narrative with their own art collection?
yeah. I think like even like how I brought y'all in here. I mean, honestly, when I host, people are like, "How much is that?" Like they
Mm.
really that's what they would really be doing. But it's actually so enriching to have someone ask me like and listen to my stories about like,
Yeah.
yeah, I was in DR and this happened and da, da,
Mm.
da. I love sharing those stories. So part of my process is like sharing one of those stories with the buyer.
Yeah.
And like for example, I'll give you I sold 3 Cole the Renaissance pieces to a friend of mine, Dapo, and we like had several meetings where we met together at DAM,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, here's the work, here's like what inspired him. I brought in the artist. I was like, yeah, like y'all meet, y'all talk about the work, and they were really inspired by each other actually.
Mm.
And he bought from the heart because he was just like, I really like that story. I really like, you know, where you come from, why you're creating, and this and that, and you're inspiring me. And so he has this feeling of like supporting the artist,
Mm-hmm.
and the artist feels supported as well.
Yeah.
And now he can have that story. So like
Yeah.
when he goes, he bought actually three originals, but 2 of them were custom. And
Mm.
so they're gorgeous. I'll show you guys. I think I sent you a picture of them actually.
Okay.
But yeah, and so now when he goes into, when people come over, they're like, "Oh, where'd you get these?" Yeah, so me and the artist chopped it up, and like you
Yeah.
kind of get that clout. Like, yeah, actually, like he had just hit the city, and like Adrielle sold me the pieces before we marked them to New York pricing. So like you can't even get them for like this price anymore,
That
and that's like
flex.
that flex. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Everybody likes to flex and talk about like what drew them to the work, and like even as a dealer, I will help you build that story. I'm like, yeah, having you told me like you're very connected to your history, and this and that, and this is like why I feel like you kind of see this aspect of the work, and then you know
Mm-hmm.
when they're bringing someone in their home, like, yeah, like I was really attracted to the historical aspect of the work, and blah blah blah, blah.
Yeah.
And we all kind of want to have those stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that speaks to the nature of us as human beings being like very social creatures, and how fine art, as in addition to like this social political context and like this manifestation of culture, it's like one of the best ways to like build community
Yeah,
and like really go across like bridges, like despite national background or origins, but despite your career, what have you, like you can really build a bridge with someone that you may have not have without the artwork.
right.
Yeah, so that's that's like really cool, and I appreciate the fact that you focus on storytelling and
Yeah,
archival history in your process.
thank you. Yeah, I feel like also like to continue the conversation about bell hooks. A lot of us want to know like, so what's the difference between like fine art and black art? Like, isn't it
Mm,
just blue chip because Rashid Johnson is in the Guggenheim and he's taking over the entire 8 floors? Like,
yeah.
isn't that fine art? And why is it black art, right? And the reason that bell hooks says is because there's not enough criticality around the work.
Okay.
All of us have talked about at end what Picasso's work is about. We all know what Van Gogh's inspiration was. We all know what Monet's inspiration was. So having these conversations is also part of like her work is like getting
Yeah.
us to speak about things. Like even when it comes to like the Met Gala themed slates of fashion, like, do you know that it comes from a book? And what is the story? What is a dandy? And why is that story? And then the more we talk about it, right, the more we're like, it's not just like a one-off of like, Black art, but it's like, no, this is the forefront. This is what all of us need to understand.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. So really like fine art and that distinction is society, you rate a society's like conversation, that criticality.
Yeah.
Like, so my brain's racing right now because I remember offline, we talked about how there is like this renaissance of the appreciation, the true, genuine appreciation for Black art.
Yes.
What are your thoughts of like, how can we, as a community of like art collectors, especially within our community, the Black community, how can we add to that criticality of Black art at scale so it is seen as fine art across the board?
Yeah, we just have to keep talking about it.
Yeah.
And I think culturally, we are, analytical people. Like when Drake and Kendrick Lamar had their whole spiel, everyone had their,
TikTok
takes. Everyone's talking about what they know in this line, blah, blah, blah. We know how to analyze things. And we feel confident in the music space, right?
Yeah.
But maybe, something like the Giants collection or like Amy Sherrod at the Whitney, like, it's just that we're not talking about it because maybe we don't feel like we have the right answer. And that's literally not what it's about. So like even just amongst each other, starting conversations like, yeah, bro, I saw this piece. Like, what do you think it's about?
Yeah.
Just literally, that's all it takes. Is like, what do you think it's about? And having a conversation and like talking more about things besides sports and, like, expand that repertoire. Cause like, I'm a socialite, so I'm always outside, and there's like certain conversations like that we continue to have. Like if we talk about high value men and women one more time, I think I'll pass away. Like, can we talk about anything else? This is a conversation we can have. Like, what do you think about the dandy? Like, why do you think that was like the most, the highest paid and the most money raised at any Met Gala in history? Why do you think that was the case?
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about some things like that. That's what's going to push us forward.
Absolutely. And, I won't ask for your take on 50/50. We'll talk about that offline, but you're absolutely right in terms of these are like historic things are happening in the world of like, especially Black art. Like to your point, like the Met Gala having astronomical sales because of like this idea of Black dandyism and how that's represented in like art and fashion. Oftentimes when I speak with my co-founder, Derek, we say like, we want Timbuktu to be so impactful that at the barbershop, brothers are talking about, man, I got this Rasheed Johnson.
Yeah.
You're not up on that. Versus just like,
the shoes, the bag,
it was like in addition, right? Because all of that is like encompassing of our culture.
Yeah.
So I really love that. And my mind's just racing like, how do we like make this the norm? But also to your point, I think in addition to folks just being insecure about whether or not their interpretation is correct, I think a lot of it is just exposure too.
Yeah.
New York City is very lucky because fine art is the culture here.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking about like other cities that we're in. Like people won't just go down to galleries randomly or see that as a social outing. So how do we like combat that as well?
Man, I think we need our leaders to also guide us. So that could be us in this room. Like we have a platform, we have a community, we have people that look up to things that we say and things that we think about.
Yeah.
And like beyond us too, like having people that other people look up to. Like, wouldn't it be great if a LeBron James, had something to say about, because he collects.
Yeah.
Why are you collecting? You know what I'm saying? Like, kind of bring more of those stories to the forefront. I think that's going to reach the masses. I would love to see it integrated into education.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's happening in the next 4 years, but
But year 5, we come
back. Year 5 though. Year 5.
We're making a comeback to year 5.
Yeah. An aspect like integrating into our schools. That's one way to do it. and resources, like you said, exposure, but I think it's the resources as well. Like having starting programs, if there isn't a program to do something like
Yeah.
that allows, transit to museums and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think just promoting that access. Sometimes it's available to us and we just don't know. So like
Yeah.
also talking about it.
I love that. And then the final question I want to leave us upon is, what's your advice for the art lover who like has this appreciation for fine art? They want to get into art collecting, but they just haven't started because they think maybe they don't have enough knowledge, money, or experience to get started. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I would say just start assuming the role. Like you don't there doesn't really need to be a difference between who you are and who you want to be. And that's
Yeah.
like something that like Lad taught me about like,
Mm,
just like that inspiration and that confidence to just own that next step.
yep.
Like, you collect one piece, you're a collector.
Absolutely.
You curate one show, you're a curator.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as Black people, we often like stray away from like taking those titles because we're so used to like earning things at like this like supreme level. Like if you
Yeah.
ask like LeBron, I don't know, I keep talking about LeBron. You ask
Your
any,
favorite player?
he's not my favorite player even. I don't even know why I'm talking about him. You ask any like, okay, you ask Tiger Woods, is he the best golfer to ever golf? He's gonna say no.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like we always kind of challenge ourselves to like keep striving. I think that's like a cultural
Yeah.
thing that we have. And I would say to that like new collector, that aspiring artist, that aspiring curator, to just if you have that desire, just own it. You go out one day and just be like, yeah, I'm a collector, and see
Okay.
what happens, because
Yeah.
that's how I started. I just started saying it, and then boom, here we are.
I think therefore I am. I love
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
And finally, where can people stay connected with you?
Yeah, okay. So the best way to stay connected with me is on my Instagram, Adrielle underscore LE underscore Bell, BELLE. That's where you're to catch all my shenanigans and art shows and things like that. And then you can also contact me at artbyadrielle.com.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be like my like more professional platform to like hear more about work that I'm selling. I always, as you see, a lot of this work I'm still running and selling,
Yeah.
and that's where you're going to get a lot of that stuff. Get press releases on shows that I've had,
Mm-hmm.
information on things that are coming up. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for a riveting conversation. This was definitely just so many gems in here. So please rewatch this interview, take down notes. This is Mamadou of Timbuktu, signing out.